let's open it up for questions. I have a couple to start out with, but if people want to start migrating to the mics, I actually want to bring up this question for Ken. Because honestly, in a number of the conferences that I've attended on the council, a tremendous amount of discussion and even suppliers coming to me and talking about glass manufacturing. And I think there was a big gulp in the room with all the glass manufacturers when Ken, you showed the skull and crossbones and claiming death to the glass box. But actually, I want to try to push this a bit, because I do think when you think about buildings and tall buildings, the exterior skin is somewhere between 15 and 20% of the cost of the building. But if I had your number right, Ken, you were talking about 50% of the energy in a building is its skin and its shape. And I think one of the things that we've been pushing at the council is building performance. And obviously, the exterior of our buildings can push, I think, much further. We, in some ways, aren't going much beyond the buildings that were built in the 50s. The glass technology's gotten better, thermal breaks, things of that nature, unitized systems, et cetera. But Ken, any thoughts on how the glass industry, as you put it, has not really kept pace? Are there ways that you see that the glass industry or the cladding industry can help us make higher performing buildings in the future?
Yeah, I mean, we talked at a glass conference only 2 months ago. I mean, I think there's a big move towards trying to make the buildings more energy efficient. I mean, there's been a sort of many years of them being quite inefficient, and because energy has been so cheap, and people have just not worried so much about it. I think the glass industry needs to come up with more insulation in terms of their coatings, in terms of looking at translucent materials, which I know there are products out there, but also looking at ways of making things much more affordable. The idea of having a double glass or triple glazed unit with blinds in the cavity or blinds on the outside, you know, is actually, we've done that all before, and there's problems with overheating, there's problems with cleaning, there's all sorts of issues that go along with that, which aren't necessarily just straight architectural issues. I think there's been this sort of desire to maintain glass. And I just think, you know, you need to really think about it. Really, do you actually need glass below a table in an office building, for instance? Do you actually need glass behind a wardrobe? You know, I think you just got to work out exactly where it's needed. And I think not enough of that has actually been done. But I think the glass industry, you know, will lose market share of the cladding industry by, you know, up to 60% unless they come up with new, better products that actually can respond to the new Part L requirements in this country, and actually work towards trying to make our buildings more carbon efficient.
Great, thank you. Okay.
Hi, Tim. It's David Scott here from Lang O'Rourke. I have a couple of questions for Mr. Zhang. I stayed in your 30-story hotel last year, and I wonder when I can book a room in your 200-story hotel. That's the first part of the question. And the second part is, I'd like to know, are you on program, and what kind of contingency have you got to do this building in 7 months? Is absolutely remarkable, and I'd be very interested to know what if it's going to be open next year.
我们的这个金属加工的能力还是有一些问题，所以我们要让很多这个协作的工厂、外面的工厂跟我们来加工。那质量管理啊，反正是比较难度还是有一些挑战的。
Our steel fabrication capabilities is still limited, so we will need suppliers, and in that aspect, our construction management have some challenge, but we'll need more help.
那么，整个计划我们现在总体来看是不会有太大的时间上难度，不会有太大的挑战。
So in our total plan. To achieve in 7 months, we shouldn't have too big of a challenge.
2年前我们做这个他说那个30层楼的时候，那时候只有100 不到200个工人，现在是差不多4000个工人。
So 2 years ago, when we were building the T30 that you just mentioned, we only had 100 workers to install the building. And today, we have 4,000 workers ready to install this building.
This is Simon Lay from ACOM. I've got a potentially controversial question in 2 parts. Sorry, I'm at the back here. Is the Sky City an inevitable response to the needs of the many from the East against designers from the West who have spent the last few years designing for the perceived desires of the rich few? And if that is the case, and given that 7 billion people are going to be living in cities by 2050, and that most of those people are going to be from the poor end of the income spectrum rather than the rich, does that make the future for tall buildings Sky City rather than glass and other fancy icons that we see at the moment?
I believe
我认为100层以上的建筑，100
buildings
层到
over
200层
100
之间的，
stories tall
任何一
between
个楼
100
层呢，
and
都适合于
200
中国大规模城市化的这么一
should
个
be
趋势。
appropriate for China's large-scale urbanization
我们不能再增加任何土地的占用了，
because we cannot increase any more use of the
无论
land.
是建筑本身对于土地的占用，还是公路对于土地的占
No
用。
matter it is the occupation of land by building itself or the transportation infrastructure.
那当然我们有很多探索，就像这个楼里面，居民
We
们
have
怎么样
many
和睦相处，这肯定是要
explorations
面临很多问题的。我们
such
有很
as
多假
inside
想
these buildings, we have to know how people can coexist.
楼里面可能还有警察，
And in this building, we may have
有一系列
police
的这个管制，
and many regulations,
关键是文化的影响。对，
and also cultural contingencies.
那我们相信这个富人如果在里面，他家里的保姆或者是里面的清洁工人能够就在附近，就在楼里面，它是更方便
And
的。
we believe the people who work for the wealthier few, and if their cooks, their helpers are living inside the building and around, it should be more
其实
convenient.
他们的日常的交通的通道是分开的。
And their daily access and tunnels and
我们这里
corridors
面
are
一共
separated.
有12个独立的通道，
And then we have 12 or so individual passages,
这里面有很多尝试，
and then many
会
attempts,
有一些问，会要面临很多挑战。
and we'll face many challenges.
Yeah, I'd be very interested to hear, Ken and Bob, what you think of that last question. Do you see that as an appropriate solution for countries like India, and how would that change the vision of an urban city?
I'd take that on 2 levels, I think. The first level would be its place in its environment, and the second would be judgment of the entity itself. Seeing it in context, I fear that in Europe, a construction like that probably wouldn't ever have a chance, quite frankly. Balanced against that, and the reliance tall buildings have on infrastructure, if ever that building emptied at one go, I just don't think that the infrastructure that we have in place will be sufficient to serve its purpose. Second point, judging the entity itself, I think there were some interesting lessons there. The repetition, the modular nature of what it is that is being constructed, and the perfectly rational form for predominantly a vertical load condition serves as a lesson. The speed at which it was constructed is admirable. I just question in Western Europe whether anything of that scale and that form would gain planning permission, quite frankly, let alone issues of infrastructure and so on.
I think Bob's being too scared. I think it's fantastic, and I think the the principles of it are amazing. That the sort of prefabrication, the idea it delivered on trucks, the idea you have a bag of bolts, get onto site with that, I think is amazing. And I think that the principles of it, whether it's needs to be that high, I think is questionable. But I think there's actually real lessons to learn there. And I know, David, you're in the sort of same area, but I think looking at some of our projects around the world where they take years to build, to actually build something in 7 months, it doesn't matter how big it is, it's fantastic. If it was a single-story house in 7 months, you'd be pretty pleased in this country. So I think it's, I think the planning permission is one thing, but again, it has to relate to its size, its context, where it is in the world, the sites you've got available, is really important. So if you've got a sort of greenfield site in the middle of nowhere, obviously you can do what you like, but if you're building in cities, I still think the principle, the prefabrication, especially if you're going tall, has got to be taken very, very seriously, because we can't keep messing about on sites, with buckets of concrete and people going up in the air in buckets. It's got to be, it's got to be done in a much more manufactured way, in the way the car industry works or the aircraft industry works. We're still at the bottom of the food chain in terms of technology, I think, in the construction industry. So I think it's fantastic.
I think one point to add to that, and David, I appreciate your teasing it out a little bit further. I have this, Simon, your point about is this really the future, to accommodate these 3.5 billion people that are going to arrive in the next 40 years? And I think it is. And I think the challenge that maybe we're having, or at least maybe I'm having, is this all too predictable? The fact that in some ways everything is figured out for you is absolutely a real plus. But on the other hand, that's not really what life's about. And I think that we could probably, I think the applications in places that are a lot less sophisticated than China, that are going to have huge population expansions into cities like Bangladesh, Pakistan, Nigeria, places like that. I think the next layer that has to evolve with this is this human level. I mean, what is it like to really live? And although it was described in the slides in terms of all of the benefits you will get, I think there's an emotional part of what life is about that's maybe missing. And I think that's, again, kind of pushing. Oftentimes you have to push the industry to a point where it's incredibly innovative. And I can't say enough about, in hearing about China Broad with the hotel and then seeing this aspiration, there's probably not a week that goes by that I don't somehow think about how this could be applied in today's world. But I just want to caution the human side of this, because I think if our lives get too programmed, we'll probably go brain dead. There was another hand that I saw. Is that, there we go. Yes.
I'm Carlos Casabon from Lima, Peru. In these days, I haven't heard anything about firefighting equipment or firefighting provisions in these tall buildings. And I wonder if some of the panelists can respond to that.
Well, actually, what I'd like to do, Mr. Zhang, you've, I think, have a lot of this worked out in your building. Would you like to describe how you've tackled it in your tall buildings?
我们现在的方法呢
current method
跟传统的是有点不同
It is a
的，
bit different than conventional methods.
因为如果用化学的防火涂料的
Because
话，
if we use
很简单，很
chemical
便宜，
paints, it's very cheap and very
但是呢，
simple,
它不耐久，
but it does not last long.
而且毒气很大。
And it's a
VOC 很
off-gas.
高。
VOC is very a lot.
那我们用的是陶瓷纤维板，
So we use ceramic fiber board.
是用硅酸锂的纤维铸成的一块一块的这样的板，
Okay, so we make
30毫米
modular
厚的，
boards that's 30 centimeters thick.
远远超过国家规定的耐火时间。
And it's much more beyond
远远超过3个
the
小时。
national regulation of a 3-hour fire retardation time.
耐火还有消防的安排，这栋楼里面有几万人。
Fire safety for a building that is
是我们
tens
花
of
时间
thousands of people.
花费精力和成本最多的。
And this is one part we have spent the most energy and most time on.
甚至于恐怖袭击都要考虑进去。
And we even take consideration of terrorism attack.
比方说，我们的地下室是货车、卡车进不去的，只能进轿车。
For example, we don't allow trucks to enter our basement.
那么各种将来的风险，
And many
涉及到安全
future
的风险，
risks, design
我们
risks,
都已经有预案。
and we have solutions.
Okay. Bob, do you have something to add to that? I know you're a structural engineer.
Well, I think the lessons of 9/11 have been well learned. I think the idea of having a safe passage through concrete core is almost a moral obligation. The work in recent years on high-rise buildings and the use of sky lobbies, the use of lifeboat lifts, the use of dedicated fire lifts have all been significant advances. But the real issue, I think, is taking a holistic approach to how we design our high-rise buildings. And I certainly find the idea of sky lobbies and refuge floors being combined has moved our design on. I know when we looked at the tower blocks way back in 1982, we didn't have such knowledge or such courage. It was generally a concrete core all the way through. But a protected zone or a hard core of some form is, in many ways, is a moral obligation.
This is a question from Mr. Zhang. I'm deeply fascinated by your presentation, but I noticed that you call it Sky City. And I'm wondering whether you think of this city as an entirely private city is a valid idea for going forward into the information age when people are very autonomous because they become used to a lot of individual technology. Have you thought at all about scenarios where you could really devolve some cultural and political possibilities to people in the building to appropriate the kind of life they would like to lead?
是这样的。
It is like this.
我们有一个简单的、
We have a very
基本的一个
simple
道德的约束。
moral obligation.
那另一方面呢，我们也希望将来在运转的时候，让
On top of that,
里
we
面的
hope
住户有更多
when
的
it's
这
in
个自己
operation
发挥
that residents have more rooms
自己
to
智慧的这个空间。
express their own wisdom.
比方说，你们的有机农场
For example, the
里面
organic
的手工
agriculture inside.
工厂，好多手
It's a
工工厂。
craft shop inside.
那么还有就是里面的各种各样的社区
And there are many
邻居之间的这种主动的交流的活动。
interactive activities.
所以呢，我们第一栋楼，像这一栋楼呢，
So
我
our
们
first building,
是
such
非
as
常有
this
限
building,
的卖给这个
and we sell it
房地
limited
产公司。
to very few parts of it. We sell it to a real estate development company.
我们对他们的限制呢是所有的
And we
公共空
restrict
间
them
都是为住户服务，
Now
不是
all
为
the
另外
public
的商业利益
spaces
服务。
are serving the residents, not for other business interests.
所以
So
里面的人对
the
外
people who
面
live
出去的
inside
需要比较少，外面
we
的
have
人也
very
不给
few
他
needs
进来
to
的需
go
要。
outside, and we also don't have any needs for people outside from coming in.
除了有一个观光的区域以外，
Other than the viewing
可以
deck,
到171层去
people
观
can go
光。
up to 170 stories to view,
其他的外面的一切需要，我们都不把它放进
and we
去。
don't have any needs for outside world.
我们不要干扰这里面的住户。
We don't want to interrupt the residents inside.
其实整体来说，就是一个
So in
重新
total,
构建一个城市的一个思维。
this is a new new way of rethinking a city, conceptualizing a city.
不知道会不会全部成功。
We don't know if it will be
至少有一部分
totally
成功。
successful, but as long as partially, if it's successful, it's good.
因为我们的建造成本很低，这是我们接下来发展的优势。
Because our construction cost is very low, this is our
也
future
是只要是经
development
济上我们不失败，
advantages. As long as economically, if we don't fail, then we will be successful in the long run.
Great,
Thank
thank you. Thank you, Mr. Zhang. if you could all help me thank our panelists for a wonderful discussion.